Greetings and welcome to this latest edition of Farhang Connect Live. I am Alireza Ardakani, Executive Director of Farhang Foundation here in Los Angeles, and a member-supported, non-political, non-religious, not-for-profit organization with the sole mission to celebrate and promote Iranian art and culture for the benefit of the community at large. Thank you for joining us from all over the world today for Iranian Cuisine and Cultural Identity, How Food Inspires Us. Today, we are thrilled to welcome an amazing panel of culinary experts to be with us for this discussion. Without further ado, I would like to introduce each of our esteemed guests. Our first guest is Andy Barabani. At age 17, Andy began working for Alice Waters' world-renowned restaurant, Chez Panisse. From there, he continued his culinary training at some of the top restaurants around the country, including Gary Danko, Corton, and Estella. By the time he was 21, he was running a monthly pop-up featuring seasonal Iranian food outside his Brooklyn apartment. In 2015, he joined Bon Appetit as senior food editor, where he developed recipes and hosts a regular video series for the brand. His work has been featured in Saveur, the Financial Times, the BBC, and the Garther Journal. Our next guest is Nadia Del Ju. Nadia Del Ju of Del is an eclectic and creatively focused entrepreneur. For Nadia, exploring the sensory palette is not only one way to introduce people to new flavors, but also to communicate culture, to celebrate and to gather. At Del, she uses food as a way to awaken the heart. Nadia has combined her passion for food, background in music, and infatuation with culture to provide her clients with immersive sensory experiences. Her style is engaging and interactive, as she curates atmospheric dining experiences elevated by music pairings. Her approach to cooking and cuisine is influenced by texture, color, and worldly flavors. Our next guest is Naz Deravian. Ms. Deravian is a James Beard Award-nominated author of the popular Bottom of the Pot, Persian Recipes and Stories. She's the recipient of the IACP Julia Child First Book Award, presented by the Julia Child Foundation for Gastronomy and Culinary Arts. Bottom of the Pot was the 2018 Food 52 Piglet Award winner and also a Taste Canada Gold Award winner for Best Regional Cookbook. Ms. Deravian has published in The Atlantic, the Los Angeles Times, San Francisco Chronicle, Saveur, O Magazine, Eating Well, and Monte Cristo Magazine. She has also been profiled in the New York Times and Bon Appetit, and she was recently featured in Padma Lakshmi's hit new series, Taste of the Nation on Hulu. She was born in Iran, grew up in Canada, and now lives in Los Angeles with her husband and 2 children. And last but not least, today's moderator is Chef Behzad Jamshidi, who hosted Farhang Foundation's first pop-up Iranian cuisine event in January 2020 at Tom Colicchio's Craft restaurant here in Los Angeles. Behzad creates ventures that are community-focused and that unify the voices that drive inclusivity forward with hospitality. He founded Moosh New York City in 2018 as a community-oriented business development firm for projects in food and beverage, and has grown to consult, advise, and partner with some organizations such as Virgin, American Express, Amazon, and the United Nations. Behzad Jamshidi's most recent endeavor was with the award-winning Gabriel Cruther in New York City. Being mentored in the kitchens of Michelin star and world-renowned chefs, Jamshidi came by the way of multitude of perspectives which encourage him to honor his Persian heritage through his culinary work. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me give a warm virtual welcome to today's guests. Hi Naz, hi Andy, hi Behzad.
Hi there, guys.
Hi Nadia John.
Oh.
Welcome. We're glad to have you here. I will step back behind the scenes now, and I let Behzad take it over from here.
So first and foremost, thank you, panel, for taking the time to be with me for this hour and going through this program. I've certainly not done anything to this pedigree for Persian culture and conversations around food like this. So at least in that way, I'm excited for us to be the first. Also to Farhang, thank you to them for all the support that they've consistently shown the Iranian community over the course of the time that I've gotten to know them. They're the first people to buy the tickets to my events, and I can't express enough the gratitude that I have knowing that there's an organization in our corner and in our pocket in the United States that really wants to put the Iranian voice forward in all the right ways. So thank you so much for making this possible. With that all said, we're talking about Iranian cuisine. Iran's history dates almost 100,000 years back to what in that landform was Persia. Current day Iran shares 7 land borders with other countries. We've consistently been this intersection and this hybrid of cultures and religions and influences, and so much narrative has gone to make the present day Iranian cuisine and Iranian culture what it is. And I still travel and find influences of Iran and vice versa between places like Japan and Thailand. So I think in how Iranian foods represent it today, it's not as deep as I think it can be. And I'm excited to have this conversation with you guys because you're doing the kind of work that helps us extend that voice farther than we could have if we didn't have these different types of programs that really celebrated our culture. So with that stuff said, I'm going to ask some questions. I'd love for you guys to kind of address one another and talk amongst one another. I'm sure you're all warm friends at this point. We've known each other from the past. You're certainly some of the most important people for me, so it makes my job quite easy. With that being said, the first thing I want to dive into is, what was some form of practice or some sort of ritual that happened in your home growing up that is kind of summative of the Iranian home that you might have been in, or just summative of the type of home that you're exposed to?
Who wants to go first?
I'll start us off. First of all, thank you to Farhang for having us. And Behzad, thanks for reaching out. I'm really happy to be with you all. I think for me, there are many rituals in an Iranian home and an Iranian kitchen. I don't know that it can be, I don't think it can be one specific thing, but I know for me personally, it's the ritual and the idea of gathering around the sofre. Mm-hmm. So that in an Iranian home and in my home growing up and in the home that I've created for my family now is a ritual that surpasses everything else. It's this idea of gathering around, be it a table, the kitchen counter, wherever you want it to be, laying your sofra on the floor. But for us, we didn't eat out a lot growing up. When we did, it was a special occasion. So the idea of cooking at home and making a home cooked meal wasn't a special thing. It was an everyday thing. And it's something that happened every day. And those scents and sounds and flavors just bounced off the walls. And it wasn't something that we thought was out of the ordinary, which I don't know if that's the case in many of my friends' homes growing up. It was more of like a Sunday night dinner or a Sunday brunch. But in our home, it was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I mean, it was just happening all the time. And I'm not quite sure how, because both my friends work as well. So it's the sofre, be it a small sofre, a humble gathering, which for me is the most special actually, or the larger mehmouni party type sofres. But it's this idea of coming together around this meal, around the table. And that's, in my family at least, where a lot happened. A lot would be said and shared, and there'd be discussions and highs and lows, and we yell and whatever, and we laugh and we tell jokes and we read poetry, but it all happened around that table.
I think a lot of different families will share your virtue in that, and in us finding like I don't know if you've ever seen it, but those plastic cover sofras that they're kind of like what you use one, throw one away, and you find yourself in like a public park, and they've embroidered all these little like beautiful, colorful images in this basically what's plastic wrap. Like even the idea of carrying ceremony for us is kind of like a dollar store necessity. Like it's so significant. But what was yours, Andy, growing up?
Very similar to Naz. First off, thank you, Beza June, for having me, and thank you to Farhang. I feel very lucky to be here amongst you all. Very similar to Naz. I grew up a first generation American in the Bay Area, California, and we certainly did not eat out at all, very, very rarely. But my parents' home specifically, and I didn't fully realize this until maybe as I got older, or even when I became an adult, that they were almost like a hub. My extended family, my family friends, they were always drawn to my parents' home. So small gatherings, big mehunis, multiple weddings happen at my parents' rather, relatively modest home. But to get even more specific, a ritual that I've realized that specific to us as Iranians, but I realize it's probably, it doesn't go for every Iranian household, is the making of torshi. Now we all eat torshi, we love torshi, but I've noticed that not everybody grew up with grandparents or a father like myself who would make torshi in these batches of it, multiple batches every year, from torshi mahmoud to torshi badam jun to seared torshi and having to wait. Now it's such a specific memory, and there's the fumes of that kind of hot vinegar, and the nigella seed and tarragon. It's something that I'll never forget, and probably gave me a liking and taste for sour and acidic flavors. Now that I've gotten older, I've become a little more critical of my father's torshi, but that's a specific ritual that I feel that was very special, that I hold on to. That's
so beautiful. Nadia John?
Well, first of all, I think we're all going to be super hungry at the end of this talk because I'm already. Hi guys, my name is Nadia. It's a huge honor and a pleasure to be sitting here amongst you guys and having this conversation. So thank you again to Farhang and for Besa June for reaching out. But for me, I'm certainly going to piggyback off of Andy and Naz. I think that's very much a shared commonality between all our upbringings, but I'm going to maybe have a more unconventional reply here and say that, for me growing up, my father would actually take me to the international farmers markets. I was born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia. And there's this strip called Buford Highway that has a plethora of international farmers markets from, Asian to Middle Eastern to Thai. And he would just kind of like take me down these aisles, perusing them and giving me little tastes of super nuanced fruits and veggies as a young child. That I think one really like opened up my palate and really exposed me to different flavor profiles, but also gave me like a really hands-on connection to fresh produce that I had so readily available to me. And then we would bring those back to the house, and similar to Naz, would cook pretty much every single meal. We never really ate out when we were kids, let alone now. I think I've cooked every single meal throughout the pandemic myself, which says a lot about kind of the upbringing that I was raised in, to really find value and significance in the act of cooking and really sharing that with people. So I think it, again, created a more intimate understanding of what produce existed out there, and bringing it back into the home and being able to create a meal from just a variety of really fresh vegetables and all that kind of stuff. So it's a tradition that we still do today. It's a tradition that I've kind of integrated into my own relationship with my career. And I try to, I guess, expose people to the nuances of what fresh farmers markets like that kind of offer us.
I think what's interesting is like, there's no lack of personality amongst Persian people. And so we all kind of grew up with parents that, or at least like family members that manifested a lot of food stories and memories for us. So, I mean, it kind of leads me into my next question where, how did the vast amount of like cultural upbringing and perspective kind of find its way into your work? Like, how did that sensibility around those Iranian practices and things that we were exposed to really manifest themselves at the tip of what you guys do in your day-to-day?
Okay, I'll go again. So for me, food became, I guess, the lens, but it was really the avenue through which I could tell my stories. I didn't set out to do this by any means. It was in my career. I cooked. I'm a home cook. I still am a home cook. And it was mostly when I had my kids and I wanted to create that same idea of the sofre. Although even before kids, my friends are my kids. So again, it was all at our house and with me cooking our food and everyone loving it. And these are non-Iranian friends I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. So when I set out to, I'm a former actor and I was, like many former actors, fed up and just kind of done after I had my kids, but I still needed an outlet. And I like to tell stories, whether it's through acting or writing them. But I found that, again, back to the scents and the sounds and the tastes and all of this stuff, that was a way that I could reach out.
We may have some. Oh, there you
go. And tell not only my story, but hopefully our stories and reach out to non-Iranians through these stories. So food just became that vehicle, and it opened up the door for me to tell more than just food stories, if that makes any sense. Yeah. But then, everyone loves the food too. So it was this back and forth of the recipes informing the stories and then the stories informing the recipes. And it's fun. It's really fun for me.
What's super cool about your book is the way that it's almost like the interaction is what the overall narrative is. And so much of the food is being driven by these moments that are more significant, maybe almost than what the food ends up actually being. So we talk about like the environment actually making the recipes. And I guess this poses it to Nadia, like you have the ability to create that environment. So what does that look like in your work?
As far as the environment's the advantage of having like a private setting. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think for me, what I'm really interested in I feel like there's an ability for me to challenge like the conventional restaurant culture or the conventional dining culture, specifically within American society, because I feel like generally American society in relation to food, it's very far removed from like the tactile qualities of cooking and like the intuitive relationship that we do have with food and cuisine, right? So with these private dinners that I do host and curate, there's much intentionality and much curation behind it. But I also think I'm able to create a narrative, right? And like guide my guests through a very immersive and interactive, engaging food experience that communicates so much more than what exists on the plate itself. It's so much more about, so much more than food. I always say that. And I think it takes people coming to my events to really understand the nuances of that. I take it, as an opportunity to elevate people's relationship to food, to music and culture, because they're all so intrinsically related, especially within such a rich culture like the Iranian culture, where hospitality is something that we have been born and bred through since we basically were born. It comes so innately and so naturally to people of the Iranian heritage that I think, for me at least, my culture is the reason why I ended up in the food industry, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
I go.
I'm eagerly awaiting this one.
I guess when it comes to like how cultural identity has influenced my work, first I was going to go and answer and talk about how it influenced my cooking and flavors and my palate, and then I had to kind of back up and realize, growing up, and I hate to go dark for a moment, but growing up and being a teenager in a post 9/11 world, there was a lot of shame about being Iranian. And just on a personal note, maybe you guys have felt that way in certain points in your life. And I certainly did not want to learn how to make Iranian food, that's for sure. I loved Iranian food. I wanted to eat that food. It's the food that I grew up every single day. I craved food. But it was not the food I wanted to embrace, even though I knew that I wanted to be in the world of food and cooking and restaurants in some shape or form. I was fascinated by the Escoffier and Antoine Carême's and the French chefs, and a very particular look in haute cuisine and the regional Italian. And it wasn't until I hate to say it, but it took me a moment. It took me until like really my early 20s to really embrace the food that I grew up with. And I've written about it and I've spoken about it, and it really came to a story that I published in Saveur that forced me to reconnect with my Iranian heritage in that food. I knew those flavors, I knew those dishes, but I didn't know how to cook them. From there, it kind of made me realize that, oh, I want to understand it. I want a deep understanding for it. And the more and more I left restaurants for media and became an editor, where I really realized that, oh, I'm in a space that I can act as a vessel and really put out recipes and bring on people and really expand the understanding of Iranian cuisine and how significant and how unique and distinct it is. That's I think it took me a moment, but I'm very happy that I got to that understanding. It's influenced my food in so many ways. I wouldn't say that I only cook Iranian food. I would say that my food is influenced by we're in a room full of Iranians, or I should say the four. Say that like my food is heavy on herbs, plenty, ridiculous, piles and mountains full of it. The tangy flavors of gure and robanar and limamani and torshi, those how they've sneaked in different ways. Maybe not exactly the way they are used in certain Iranian dishes, but I've definitely utilized them in my cooking. And also this kind of delicateness. I think people who aren't Iranian are thinking, oh, Iranian food must be heavily spiced, and I'm like, no. To me, it's so delicate. It's such a unlike a lot of the surrounding countries. It's very a careful approach on how they spice their dishes. So it's in my blood in every shape or form, and it's very much a part of the food that I cook.
For anyone that hasn't read that Saveur article that Andy wrote, I think I read it a few years ago, and I sent it to my brother almost immediately, and he's like, this is the best thing I've ever read. And then I kind of made it like my mission to find a way to have a conversation with Andy. A good friend of ours, Joe Sabia, made the first introduction, but that idea that, you know, when you're at the precipice of figuring out where your culture fits with you, I also did that thing where I moved to New York and wanted to be in French restaurants. And it was actually, surprisingly enough, Anthony Bourdain who told me you shouldn't cook French food because there's so many people to cook it. But it's not always the answer that your culture is going to find itself in your work. It's very funny how that is, but it's almost primitive how we find our way back to it in some capacity or form, right? It's a big part of what makes us, or what makes us up.
To add, it's like, you know, we're so, I think for so long we were stuck on society telling us like what is kind of this false hierarchy of cuisine, and how, you know, European cuisine is at the top and certain other cuisines are lower, and it's this.
Nadia doesn't use white tablecloth, you know, like there's a reason behind that. It should feel more personal. It's the sofra.
I think also, I don't know if this is, I think for most Iranian kids, at least for myself, there isn't this culture of in our moms or dads or khales or, you know, amma's kitchens of, oh, come let me show you how to cook this food. No, it's more like the opposite.
Get out of the way.
Do not come in. If anything, you can maybe go through the sabzi or shell the fava beans, but there wasn't, for me, there wasn't a, now I'm going to give you, you know, pull up the stool and we're going to do this together. There wasn't that. It was, you know, it was go do your studies or do anything else. Why do you want to be in the kitchen? So for many of us, I think it was finding our way to the kitchen and specifically to this food. I know for me, it was when I first moved to LA to pursue that thing that I was going to do that everyone does in LA, and finding myself hungry that first week. It hit me, and it was my first time on my own. And it wasn't because I didn't have food in the house, but I was hungry for our food, for that sofre, for the rice and, you know, the stews and whatnot. And that's when it hit me that not only does this feed, you know, it doesn't just feed me, but it soothes me, and it's a way to, it's a comfort and a way back home.
I mean, this is or no, Nadia, please.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, for me, I think that struck a chord in my thought process, what Naz said, because in many ways for me, and I think we can all agree here, it's a way in which we really intimately preserve our culture as like, I mean, I'm an Iranian American, my parents were born and raised in Iran, and the way in which, you know, it's that delicate balance between being modern and traditional, you know, and like, where do you lie? How do you continue pushing on traditions and carrying on your family name or certain behaviors and habits, as we talked about before, from your upbringing and your cultural background. And I think the easiest and the most intimate way to do that is via food, you know, because as we said, it shares a narrative, it tells stories, but it's also such an act of love. Like, for me, cooking, ever since I was young, has always been my most primal way to connect to my my culture and really like explore that culture. And I think now I'm in a season of being able to like share that with people. And I think we're all doing that in our own very specific ways, you know. But it, as you said, it's that degree of comfort, but also just connecting you back to something so ritualistic and so grounding and rooting that is very effortless in our culture, from my experience at least.
And I think this is kind of going to tie into the question that I'm shooting over at Naz, but if Andy and Nadia John, you have any comments and stuff and ideas to share with it as well, like jump in. But for Naz, like, and I've gone through as many Persian cookbooks as I possibly can, and I'm not writing one anytime soon, to say the least. It's an enormous undertaking. But what are some of the considerations that you have to take when you're writing an Iranian cookbook? Or it can even be, to say, a culturally fueled cookbook. And I'm sure there's many, but like, you know, I'll let you speak to it, because people read something from side to side and it's like, this is summative of years, decades of life, you know?
Yeah, it was not an easy thing for me to take on. I'd never written a cookbook or a book or anything of the sort before. So I joke that I went gray writing this book, and I really did go gray. And it's, you know, it was a balance. I think writing about your culture is always a balance act, because you want to pay homage, you want to give due respect to this, like you said, thousands-year-old culture. And yet at the same time, this was my story. I was born in Iran, but I left when I was 8 years old, and I've never been back. So I had to also respect and go forth with my own experience outside of Iran. And I think it's this typical immigrant story of constantly being caught in the middle of wanting to be respectful and carrying all those thousands of years on your back, and yet being truthful to your own story. It was hard. It was really, really hard, because I kept questioning throughout the whole process, you know. There's this word being authenticity thrown around, which I think we can all agree there is no such thing, because this food differs not only, and I think it's coming to light more and more, and as it should, that Iranian cuisine is extremely varied. Their regional cooking is extremely diverse and varied. There isn't one Iranian cuisine. And I think we're slowly coming around to that there's the food of the north, and there's the food of Azerbaijan, and there's the food of the south, and there's the food of Esfahan. And I mean, yes. And so even for Iranians, I think, particularly outside of the country, we're coming around to that understanding. And then not only is it the various provinces and regions, but it's varied by neighborhood. And then you come in and it's varied by household. So you can't put a stamp on it that this is this cuisine and this is the way it is. So that I had to quickly let go of.
Absolutely.
And when I did that, it was very freeing. But at the same time, and I hope this came across and comes across in my work, that be it in the head notes or in the stories, that I give due respect and I do give context and background. And I will mention in my home, this is how we did it. But in Mrs. So-and-so's house, they might have done it like this. Now, I can't go through every Mrs. So-and-so's house, obviously. And I think it's incumbent on all of us, because Iranian food, I feel, is becoming more and more popular, and yay for that. And we're all so happy about that. But I think it's incumbent on all of us to now really do the research as well, and to get down to the root and the history of this. And it's kind of, I think it's like, if you want to be a modern artist, you still have to study the masters.
Yeah.
In order to set yourself free, you still have to know where the masters were coming from and what the traditions were, and that will just inform my work. It'll just make it that much richer, even if I'm not going to use it. So back to your question, I really went off.
No, that was amazing. I mean, like it ties in a little bit with Andy as well. And I mean, I share this all the time. I tell people that authenticity, and Sergio Cervani, a chef that I had the pleasure of him kind of giving me his time and space in Iranian Armenian. We talked about what authenticity was, and my mom and my sister, or my mom and her sister, aunts grew up in the same family under the same cook, and me and my cousins cherry pick which recipe my mom does better versus my aunt, and vice versa, right? Like even down to the hands. They say each hand has its own flavor, its own nuance, right? But within that, so say you write the cookbook, you get people excited about this cuisine, they start exploring it. The question then I kind of position for Andy is, what are some strategies that you may use in media or in the food space that encourage people to actually cook Iranian food? Because I'll get a cast for like, hey, come on this cooking show to do Persian food in 30 minutes. And you're like, what am I going to cook for you in 30 minutes? How do you render that accessible to an audience of people that run on, different necessities of time that we necessarily might?
Well, I think part of it is, now I have so many thoughts. I want to organize them. I think one thing you touched on is that Iranian food is quite labor intensive, and it can take hours and hours chopping and prepping and simmering. And so part of the reason why I think it doesn't translate too well to the restaurant medium. Great Iranian food, as we all know, starts at the home, and very much is found in the home. I think when it comes to how to kind of shed light and showcase Iranian food in food media, I think it's something that I've struggled with. I still very much struggle with. For me, I never want to over modify or streamline or simplify these dishes. I don't like using the word traditional or authentic, as we were saying, dishes of Iran. But like Naz was saying, I want to provide context. I want people to have an understanding about whether it's a specific thing of like, this is what limouamani is. This is how it's made. This is, it's funny that I'm saying limouamani because Behzad wrote an article. But like, this is how it's boiled in a salt brine, how it's set out in the sun, how when it's a paler shade, it is slightly astringent and tangy. When it's brown, which you tend to see a lot more in Iranian cuisine, it's a little bit more musky compared to when it's very, very dark and nearly black, when it's the most astringent of blacky and musky. I think like providing that understanding about these ingredients, these components that make up Iranian cuisine is key. I think when it comes to the recipe themselves, I think it's being, as just like with any recipe, being really thoughtful in how you present it. You can't tell people how to make a Persian rice and just say, you need to rinse the rice this many times. Why are they rinsing the rice? They're removing the surface starch. What is that doing? That's giving that distinct, fluffy texture you get with Iranian food. Why are you grinding the saffron when I see it all the time, just grind it between two fingers? Why do you have to grind it to a powder? Why do you bloom it in water? Like there has to be, again, context. And for that, it doesn't matter to me if the recipe is running very long or if it has too many ingredients. You're providing, you have to be respectful to those traditions and preserve them before you even try to kind of swap ingredients out or modernize them or do any kind of, I hate to say this, but like, I work in food media, but like a weeknight friendly. I try not, you don't want to editorialize these kind of dishes that have been around for hundreds of years.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a brevity that I think we've touched food with for quite some time also, like down to the recipe in the kitchen. Like I will work in a kitchen environment and the cook that's being asked to do a task is not always getting the formal explanation on why there's significance in the techniques that they're being asked to use. Even down to how we create food, we're not, because of efficiency and other things, we're skipping over a large part of it. And I think a big part of our job, at least us and the many of us that do this for their work, is to make people care, or to give things for people to consider that they might care about. And then it's really up to them how deep or how knowledgeable they decide to be about Iranian food, how much they care to cook a 3.5 hour stew. You got to give them enough reasons to care, I guess.
I should say that also another thing that I struggle with is like, I am not trying, and as much as I love my mother's food and family members and many other Iranians that have cooked for me, I'm not necessarily wanting or have a desire to cook that exact food and put out those exact recipes. You know, food, whether we like to admit this or not, dishes evolve over time. The warm sabzi that we think of, it has evolved over time. Variation, proportions, they do evolve, and dishes do evolve. So for me, when I'm putting out something that is, for example, I think I made a reime, like I didn't really want to change the major components. I knew there should be lapid, there should be limamani, but frankly, majority of the potatoes that I've seen that are put on reime are not very good. So I wanted to come up with my own thing. You can't tweak every single part, but there are ways to kind of, I wouldn't even want to say refine because that is the incorrect term, but fool the eye or present it differently.
Yeah. And I
think that's also one thing we tend to forget as Iranians is that that's actually a big part and spirit of our cooking is making it your own. Every Iranian mama does it their own way too. You know, they put their own spin on it and they won't tell you what they did. So I think that once you have an understanding, like Andy said, and like we've been saying, once you have context, I highly encourage, you know, people who are cooking from my book or from anywhere else that they get an Iranian recipe is read it through, make it once as written, get an understanding of it, and then by all means, as far as I'm concerned, do what you want to do with it in your home to suit you and what you have on hand. And this is the spirit of Iranian cooking is very much to use what you have on hand and to just make it work for you. I don't get offended if someone touches my recipe. I do, however, you know, I don't get offended, but if you come back to me and said, well, I didn't do X, Y, and Z, and this is why, and it didn't turn out good, well, then that's on you. That's not the recipe that I wrote. If you do want to swap out ingredients, and I think like Nadia said during this pandemic, I think it's interesting that it was I think immigrants, we had a way of knowing how to deal with these shortages and diving deep into our pantries and freezers and not having to run out every second to buy something. It was ingrained, at least for us. It was like, okay, here we are. We're going to use up everything that we have and make it work. So I do think in the spirit of Iranian cooking, and I encourage even all the Iranians who really want to stick to the tradition, is to look inside your homes and to the way your family's cooked. And it wasn't by the book every single night.
Yeah. I mean, the best foods are made out of necessity.
Well,
I would argue that for all foods across the world.
And that points specifically to Iranian cuisine, which is dictated by geography, what you have on hand, whether you're in the north of the country or the south of the country. It's dictated by what's growing out of that earth. That's the first and foremost thing. So, and that's where you'll see the differentiation between the different regions, you know, of how the same ghormeh sabzi can be slightly different in different regions.
Right, and it's so interesting you say that, because this whole conversation reminded me of a family gathering we had years ago, where my dad invited his entire, side of the family over, and he challenged everybody to make their own version of ghormeh sabzi. So we just had like a whole table, probably of like, I think maybe 10 or 12 different versions of ghormeh sabzi from all the aunts and all the uncles. And every single one tasted vastly different, which was such an interesting experience, because like generally it's the same ingredients, right? You have your herbs, you have your limamani, you have your rice, you have the beef. But as Behzad was saying earlier, how every hand also is a very significant ingredient. And that puts such a different take on the end product of a dish. And people taste differently too, which I think is really interesting to kind of explore that whole concept, because again, take the same techniques and the strategies in relationship with food and cooking, but everyone does taste differently. Everyone does have such a different relationship with produce, with the history, with their own experience of that, again, tactile quality of actually cooking, that creates just such an interesting conversation at the end, and creates so much room for variety and so much room for new traditions and new relationships to form as kind of the generations go on and on and on,
Well, it's interesting. And we've kind of covered the question that I wanted to prompt you, but I can maybe ask something differently. But it seems like the type of setting when you're able to do something like a private dinner and deeper into the considerations that you take for your programs, which is driven by the local produce. That first is and God, I'm sorry if anyone wants to be upset about this at some point, but I hate the farm to table claim. It's like a lawyer telling you that they'll keep you out of jail. It's like, it's a part of your job. Like a doctor is supposed to consider your health. Like a chef should be cultivating local wherever possible. And I think that almost is more instinctively Iranian than what even would end up on a table in terms of flavor, because like Naz was sharing, like that's part of the prompt. So I guess my question for you is, what are maybe certain examples from dinners or dishes or things that you might have turned out where you were like, I got it. Like this makes sense. Like this private dinner setting and these types of programs are, these are the reasons why I want to cook food this way, because I can't cook it a different way in another setting.
Right. I touched on this a little bit before, but I think it's so much about that personalized curation and really creating a very intimate narrative and inviting these people into my home, because I do this in my residential space, and creating that same narrative of hospitality that we talked about earlier in this panel, that's so intrinsic to Iranian Americans or Iranians in general, so I'm able to very intentionally, focus on the certain dishes. And I do a lot of music pairings with my food. I think music and food are very much one and the same. The act of cooking itself is sound. If you really think about it, you're really borrowing from all your senses. So I really want to bring people into that focal point and engage with them in a really intimate setting. And I do a lot of, as we talked about fresh produce, I certainly serve meat and protein, things like that, but there's a lot of focus on the integrity of vegetables and really celebrating them for what they are as a main star and as, again, a focal point, because there's so much magic in just really savoring certain food experiences and understanding the greater context behind dishes and how you share that with people. I think also in modern, Western food culture, it's become, food is very much like a trendy thing, right? Like restaurants have a lot of clout, or there are certain food experiences that you go to or share with people because it's cool to do so, not particularly because it ties you back into this greater context of food and culture and the significance of what it means to dine with people in a really intimate space. So I'm just trying to like challenge people to look at food experiences in a much more unique and intimate way through my work right now.
I mean, I had this moment actually at the Farhang dinner, the first dinner program or series that we did with them. And I mentioned this to you when we were talking up on our call, but I put Frank's Red Hot sauce with their horma sabzi course that they were having. And I was born and raised in Canada. I was born in in the most Iranian household you ever could have heard of. Like it was just Persian music, like moin and shad, like all of it top to bottom, like dad that would wake up screaming like a hummingbird at 6 a.m., the whole works. But we were still assimilating into our space. We were in Vancouver. We were not in Tehran. And hot sauce found its way in and out of the house in many different forms, Tabasco, Louisiana, whatever it was. It's so good. But like the acidity makes sense for whatever it's worth. If anyone wants to fight me on it or say that I bastardize Iranian food in whatever capacity, but like that for me is a piece of my my history, because that tells you not just about my culture, but what my home was like and who the people in my home are like, and you know what things they may have been opened up to in that capacity. And so much of the idea of authenticity is too culturally relative and not as personal as it actually should be. And so, I mean, kind of to poise this panel, what's very remarkable about what you guys do in your work is you're not just capturing an Iranian story in some capacity, because as we said, it's instinctive of you guys to dive into your culture, but you're capturing your own personal story. Nadia grew up being like very deeply immersed with music and production with her dad and all the different exposures of music. It only makes sense that music's such a big part of the dining experience then, because then it wouldn't really be honest to what you're doing in your work. It would just be, you know, curating a space to do a checklist as opposed to, do things feel right? If I read this book beginning to end, does that feel right? And I think the answer across the work that you guys have done so far is generally yes. Is Andy in that Salvador article? I would argue, yeah, he's pretty much all there. I'm gonna prompt maybe one more question, and then I believe we're gonna open up to general questions for people. I was gonna ask something serious, but I'm gonna choose not to. What's your favorite Iranian dish? That one, and I know we're like, oh, you can't pick one, whatever it is, but like something that your mom might have made better than someone else growing up, or you know, just one Persian dish that you may not be able to do without. I want Naz's and I'm most curious.
I can go first, Naz. It's up to you.
Yeah.
You take it, Andy.
All right. I have to admit, I don't know if I don't think this is my favorite when it comes to flavor. Actually, it's not my favorite when it comes to flavor, but it's up there. But it's my favorite when it comes to just the amount of components, and says something how I like to eat, which is just a lot of different dishes, and that is abgusht. And I love abgusht because you just, the whole process of it with the lamb shanks and the chickpeas, the beans, robe goji, sometimes fresh goji, depending on the household, limon money, the turmeric, and then just waiting until everything is creamy and tender and the meat falls apart and is sticky, that kind of specific to the lamb shanks, and then separating the solids, the legumes and the meat from the liquid, a potent, tangy liquid, and then mashing it up. We didn't have a DZ, it was just like a potato masher in the pot, until you have this kind of sticky.
It's like refried beans.
Like refried
beans.
It's very much like refried beans.
Good.
And then watching and not understanding at a young age my father sucking the mouths of the when and like on the floor, and then realizing by the time I'm like 13, 14, like no, this is like gold, so I need to get in there too to fight for the bone marrow. But then you have these two things, and then the platter of sabzi khordan, seer torshi if you're in my parents' household. And then for me, I think like a glass of dul is also something that I love. Although I've heard, I don't know if this is true, that you would eat abgusht, obviously this is pre-revolution, with what I don't even know what, like grain alcohol infused with tut, mulberry infused grain alcohol, and you would eat that to cut the richness of the dish, and I just love that.
I don't think you can top this one.
No, that was such a good answer. Oh my God. I'm like, biryani, that's like all I got. My mom makes it better than anywhere I've ever had it. And everyone's like, you haven't been to the right spot. And I doubt you could ever make better biryani than my mom. We'd have people knee by knee and shoulder by shoulder in our little tiny apartment when we were growing up, and just fresh pita bread and aunts and uncles passing it around. Corona beer, because it was like the one time a year we actually like drank something, and Corona was it. But that dish in and of itself just brought so many people into our house, and I get teary up every time I have that first look when I go back home. It's really so extraordinary.
I'll go next, and I'm gonna take it completely, swing it the other way around. And now I'm craving al pusht, of course, because it's very cold here too. And for me, it's, of course, there are many, many dishes that are delicious and comfort and all of that. But for me, it's really the most simple, and it's katib almost, which is just a simple way of making rice. So it's not the whole two-step process. It's just by absorption, but then it gets just so delicious, and the sense of it with plain yogurt. Yogurt for me is life. I couldn't live without yogurt. It's everything to me. A fridge without yogurt, to me, I start to get panicky about it. And it's just plain rice with plain yogurt in a simple bowl. And, that was what they used to give us when we would feel a little bit sick. Like if you had like your stomach wasn't well, it was just, but to me, it's still the most comforting and delicious bowl or plate of food that I can.
I love that.
And not to be outdone by chips almost, which is salted. For me, it's salted rippled chips. It has to be very specific, and plain yogurt, and that could rival it.
That's so funny.
Great answer.
Nadia John, and what was yours?
Well, I mean, mine doesn't compare to those two. For me, korma sabzi, it's an obvious, very cliche answer, but it holds a lot of emotional significance. It reminds me of my mom's mom, who was probably one of the most incredible cooks that I had the privilege of tasting her food and eating her food growing up. So for me, I mean, like maybe 5 plates, like back to back to back until I can't breathe anymore. Definitely have to have like the raw onion, potato tahdig for sure. And then at one point use the onion to scoop the khoresh and just eat it like that. It's like whenever I go back to my parents' house and I smell my mom cooking it, it immediately takes me back home, and like it's like a warm hug. So again, probably a predictable answer, but it's my go-to for sure.
I mean, an onion lokma is the most Iranian thing I've ever heard of. So we have so we're gonna jump to Q&A now. We have quite a bit of questions. I think the easiest way would be, I'm going to try to audition questions off to you guys and kind of delegate. And then if you guys kind of want to rapid fire any comments back and forth, let me know. First question. Hi, what are some Persian type dishes one could use dried limes, limu amani? Love them in Persian food, but would love to experiment with this flavor profile in non-conventional ways. Thank you. Andy Barabani.
It depends on if it's whole or if it's broken down. Typically what I would do is just kind of break it down, cut it in half, remove the bitter seeds, and pulverize it like in a spice mill till you have a fine. And then you have a powdered limu amani. And I would use it as like a spice rub, mix it with other warm spices. I think like lamb chops would be good. Throw that on the grill once you get some of the warmer months. Or a braisey cut of meat, I would sprinkle that on that and braise it. But also you could sprinkle it onto like a salad. It's going to add a punch of acidity and tang. So think of it as like a dry acidic ingredient. Or also mix it into vinaigrette.
Awesome. For someone running on a one-person catering business of a Persian American food in KC, any tips for preparing herbs in bulk? Nadia.
Preparing herbs in bulk?
Yeah.
As far as like just the washing and frying, well, regardless, I do a lot of that. Similar to Andy, herbs are like my holy grail for sure. So definitely save the stems. The stems actually hold a lot of flavor, and there's a lot of nutrition inside of them. Totally different flavor profile than the leaves. What I do when I go grocery shopping is I buy a ton. I wash them all, take the rubber band or like the wrap out of it, because that helps it encourages like molding and stuff like that and wilting. So take that off, give them a good wash. And then what I like to do is wrap them up in paper towels and put them in little Ziploc baggies or even just big quart containers. And then just have them at the ready when I need. So hopefully that answers your question. But
yeah, I love that. I don't know. There's going to be some mixed reviews here. I grew up doing child labor in a family restaurant back in Vancouver. So we put our herbs in like a food processor, the Black & Decker one that you could shake as much as you want. It would never break for as long as it existed. You help activate an enzyme essentially when you're breaking down herbs in a food processor or in when you're not using a straight blade or whatever else. And that enzyme is actually part of the reason why you get like a thick ash or something like an ashishte or hormesabzi. The cultures inside the herbs start to activate. So everyone's like hand chop your herbs, like don't bruise them through a Vitamix. There's like good science on the side of actually like both being efficient and actually making better stews by putting things through a food processor. So don't feel like you're cheating the system. You're doing it right. Why do you think Iranian restaurants only seem to focus on kebabs, just a few main stews, and the more extensive high cuisine of Iran is not featured in a restaurant setting? Anyone want to tackle that one? Nazjan?
Yeah, it's time to love my kebabs. And I think many Iranians actually go out to a Persian restaurant to eat kebabs rather than the stews and whatnot. But it's really time to look beyond kebabs. So I think that's for many of us. We've been trying to fight that stereotype that Persian food, it's just all about the kebabs. So no, there's so much more to it. And I think there's a lot of great work being done in the states that I know of chefs highlighting the cuisine of various regions. I know Hanif Saad with Comage in Northern California and Berkeley. He does an incredible job with Northern Iranian food of the Caspian region. And I know at Sofre, Chef Nassim is doing a great job. She has a couple of Southern dishes from the southern part of Iran. So I think it's happening. But again, I think Iranians ourselves, we really need to start educating ourselves more about our cuisine. And the difficulty with that is that we don't have a lot of written information on this cuisine. We just don't. There are like just a few handful of books. And obviously, Mrs. Batmanglich, Najmiya Batmanglich, gave us all a great gift by writing her books. But aside from those and a few other Iranian written in Persian, there's just not a lot of written history. There's a lot of oral history, but there's not a lot of written history. But the more we speak amongst ourselves and reach out to people inside Iran who are really knowledgeable about this kind of thing, I think it'll get here eventually. But we need to do our part and we need to demand it. So we need to demand, like, okay, so we know the kebabs and the hormesabzi and khoresh qeime and fesenjoon, all the restaurants make them. Great, but it's time to start pushing and demanding for more regional cuisine.
Yeah.
The best way, and I'm a consultant that gets this question literally every other week. The economy of the traditional restaurant, as we understand it, is quite poor because it's expensive food. But also, Iran doesn't cook in all Persian menu. There's a kababi, there's a kalapacha spot, there's one person that does halim or ash. And we need to start thinking about the economy of food in that way as well, where if you do know someone in your community space that does one type of food quite well, try to get them a small spot. It starts from you guys going to your kababis and asking for more, or choosing where you actually start to interact. I know there's a lot of community level food that's being shared that's not a brick and mortar restaurant, and are ways to encourage Iranian food like this to be cooked more. So look out for them. At least on my social channel, I try to amplify as many people as I humanly can that I think are doing that type of thing. And so, yeah, it starts from us actually spending our money and interacting with the right kind of people. Why does musmusiz taste like manna from the gods? It's so delicious, and I would like to request a recipe as I've never been able to recreate what I've had in Iran. Why, guys?
I mean,
yeah, go ahead. Go, Andy.
No, I mean, it's like, I love mussel mousse here. I feel like I don't make it as, I've made it many times. I don't make it as often as some of the other mousse. I mean, I think it starts with like good moussir. Every time I've gotten moussir, I've been very fortunate where it's my grandparents are bringing moussir, and I think properly, for me, it's boiling it enough so that it becomes tender, and then just finally chopping it, and it's the right ratio of moussir to mousse. But I don't know if there's a ratio I have on top of my head. I'm thinking like, what would you guys say? Like, I would go heavy on the moussir. Like, I'm saying like a third half cup finely chopped to maybe 3 cups mousse. Is that crazy? And plenty of salt.
And plenty of salt.
I
I
think
mean,
it comes down to personal taste too. So if you love that heavy moussir, I would, if you get those packets that we can get here, use it all for like a container, definitely of a container of yogurt. And then it depends if you like to have that bite under tooth or not. And if you don't like to have, if you like it to be more creamy and soft, put once you've softened the moussir and gone through like the little the hard parts, you don't want that. Mix it in the blender with a little bit of mousse, with a little bit of yogurt first. So, and then add it to the rest, and then you'll get that smooth thing. It's really, I think it comes down to personal taste. Play around with it, and then you can just add more moussir to it. And moussir, for those that don't know, is a specific type of dried shallot that's only grown in Iran. It's not the shallots that we get here.
Yeah,
so
very different.
You're not going to get the same thing. It's the closest, I suppose, to elephant garlic here, but it's but again, it's not exactly elephant garlic.
I'm going to wrap up questions. I'm going to throw a Q&A on my own personal social channel and probably bother these 3 beautiful people. If you guys have any other Persian questions you want to forward there. I just want to close out and then hand it off to Alireza June to address you guys before end here. Thank you, panel, for being so beautiful and giving me your time and space to ask questions. This was the first of hopefully many Iranian discussions around food that we end up having. I want to at least speak on behalf of myself as a kid that grew up as an Iranian and not having people inside the food space to look up to even imagine what a career for an Iranian in food would look like. Every parent and every person that's around someone that's growing up passionate about food in the Iranian space needs to be an enabler and an encourager. I think we traditionally have a very stark understanding of what a culinary career can look like. And there's a multitude of different places that you can land between a cookbook author, an editor, a chef, a small business owner, a consultant. And so the landscape, it's vast, and it's asking for us to show up and share our culture. So encourage Iranian food in whatever capacity you can. And hopefully I get to cook with some of your future pupils in my kitchen someday. Thank you again also to Farhang. I'm going to pass it off to Alireza Jan.
Thank you. It's a little over afternoon here, and I'm starving now after all these delicious conversations. So I don't know what I'm going to make, but thank you all for joining us. An amazing panel, an amazing discussion. We've done so many questions that we were not able to address. Lots of great comments. People are really loving this conversation, and hopefully we can do it again. Because there's so much more to still discuss. I have to thank everyone who joined us today from all over the world. We have people from literally all over the world on right now. So thank you for taking the time to be with us. Thank you again. And we look forward to the next time. Everyone be safe. And hopefully we can see you all in person very soon.
Awesome.
Have a great
Thank you guys.
Your day.
Have a good rest of your day.